Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to the first lecture of Introduction to Information Security. Well, actually the course is called Information Security, but today is going to be a day full of introductions. So what are we planning for today? The first thing is that I want to introduce the team who is doing this course together with me, as well as the administrative information that you're going to need to get a grade. At the end, we're going to have a first look at some topics, but just a tiny bit. So in particular, today's course will be a bit shorter than usual. What I do want to introduce is some very basic terminology from the context of information security and a very first look at the concepts of cryptography. So what is information security actually about? Well, first and foremost, it's apparently about cats because she just decided to join. But in reality, it's of course more about securing data. So in particular, all the tasty bits of data that you have on your devices, whether that's your identity in the sense of the person that people know, or whether it's, for example, your banking information or your passwords or all your nice files that you have. All of these things are assets that we want to protect. And why are they under threat? Well, that's because a lot happens to them. So in particular, they're being processed on your machine, they might be sent elsewhere, they might be shared with people, they might be stored somewhere, and in all these cases, there might be an adversary who is interacting with the system. So how can they interact? Well, they have some normal means of interacting, like using the available interfaces, but they do also have some additional ways of interacting, including observing behavior that the machine is having, for example, the amount of power it consumes, and they can try to manipulate stuff by doing things which are not covered by the regular protocols or APIs. And in this course, we want to cover several different aspects of this whole picture here. So the very first part is going to be about cryptography. And the main question of cryptography is, how can we exchange information securely while everyone is watching our computer, watching our network connection, and similarly. And this is going to be a relatively mathematical part. So don't be scared by this part, the rest is going to be different. But we do need some mathematical foundations to achieve this rather difficult goal. The second part is going to be about the actual computations. So how to securely compute with data while you're sharing a processor with someone. So this is the systems perspective. And the final part comes into play as soon as your data leaves your machine. So this is network security. And the main question here is, how do you establish a secure connection between devices to share your information? So this is the application perspective. It will also cover some other topics, like, for example, privacy. So this is a very, very, very short overview of the course. But who is doing the course? So who are we? You might have noticed that there are quite a number of lecturers listed in the course description in QGrads Online. And one of the reasons is the fact that we have these three parts I've discussed earlier. These three parts actually match quite well the three parts or the areas that we have at our institute. So all the lecturers are at IAIK, the Institute of Applied Information Processing and Communications. And here we do research in four areas that will sound rather familiar to you if you've listened on the previous slide. Namely, we do cryptography, so the more mathematical foundations that make it possible at all to do something securely. System security, so actually executing this stuff securely. Secure applications, so if you think of the layer model, further up in the layers towards actual interaction with humans. And finally, we also have an area that's not so much covered in this course, but in other courses, namely formal methods. So formally proving that all of the stuff we're doing here is actually correct. And this is also the reason why we have so many lecturers. So one from each area for each of the three blocks. I'm going to do the first block. I'm an assistant professor in cryptology and privacy, Maria Eichelseder. And I'm also the responsible person for the administrative stuff. So if you have any issues, if there is something wrong with your exam, or if you need something relevant to the lecture, I'm the person to nag about it. We do have 2 more lecturers. One of them you already know from several other courses, Daniel Gruß. He's also an assistant professor in system security, so of course he covers system security. And finally, we have a 3rd lecturer for the application and network part, and that's Jakob Heer. He's a PhD student in the secure applications area, and he's going to tell you all about attacking and defending networks. But this is only for the lecture. So for the exercises, we have some additional help on board. In particular, we have Daniel Kahles, who is administering the thing. So maybe you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi and welcome from me too. Good morning. Yeah, I'm Daniel. I'm also a PhD candidate in the crypto group at IIK, and I will be mostly responsible for the cryptography part of the lecture, but also the overall for the exercises, but also the overall administration. And then we also have Martin here as a PhD student in the system security group, and he will be also helping us out with the exercises and will oversee the system security part in particular.
And we also have some additional help for the exercises.
Yeah, so you're quite a lot of people. I think here we now have about 130, but in total there are about, I think, 360 people enrolled in the course, so we need a lot of help to cover things like the exercise interviews. And here we have our 6 teaching assistants, starting with Elias, Clemens and Katharina, Amel, Clemens, the second one, and Thomas. So you will see them in some capacity during the exercise interviews and maybe also during the question hours.
But of course, there is a 3rd very important part to this course, and that's you. So for this reason, we're hoping that you're going to interact a lot in this course. Some of you already have discovered how to. So in particular, we're going to use Menti for getting some interaction done here. You can find a link to this at the bottom of the video in the description, where you can react, but in particular, you can ask questions. And the 3rd thing you can do is you can help us if we have some actual questions for you. And this is what we're going to do right now. So it would be great if you could join in a moment to answer a few questions that we have. I see we have a problem because apparently the slides are not included. We'll have to fix that in a moment, but in the meantime, you have time to go to the video description and find the link there to join the quiz. You can also answer your first question already. So here we are back after some technical issues, as are of course necessary in every good course. So we do have your first answers already. That's great. So the first question that we were interested about is what exactly you are studying. So we have a few options here. I hope I can still puzzle out the ordering. I think the first one was computer science. This seems to be the largest group among you, but only by a small margin. So software development is apparently not far behind. And a tiny bit smaller, the ICE group. And a tiny few other participants. So welcome to the Lehramtsstudenten and to any incoming students or students who are doing this as a free subject. Okay, there are still a few voices coming in, so I'll wait just a few seconds longer before I switch to the next question. Okay, so in particular, oh, there are already 150 people here. That's great. So that's a lot of people, but what I was wondering is whether you actually know each other. So do you know anyone else in this course, or are you, in particular, if you're taking it as a free subject or so, are you maybe not in touch with anyone? Okay, we have a clear favorite here. Apparently everybody knows just a few people. So maybe not so many socialites here, but there is also an astonishing number of people who knows nobody. So if this is the case, it would be a great time now to join our Discord server. So of course you can chat about anything there, but we do have some social events, and we also have a group there where you can find a team partner that you will need for the exercise part. So if you're in this group here, please try to change that and try to belong to this group at the end of the term. And our Discord server would be a great way to go about this. Okay, there is one more thing I'm curious about. This is not so much about you, but more about what your other lecturers actually decided. So I'm really curious how many of your courses this term are actually held online, because it seems that lots of lecturers have very different opinions about how to run this. So in particular, I'm curious, how many are starting online now? How many do you think are going to be online in December? And how many would you like to be online? So would you maybe prefer more online or more presence? Okay, so it looks like already about 80% is already online. That's actually more than I expected. But it seems that you also are reasonably okay with that. So though some people would prefer some more interaction. So if you would like more interaction, of course, you can also go about organizing that yourself to some extent. So for example, in particular, if you're in the I Know Nobody group, how about, I don't know, agreeing on meeting, for example, in Infeldgasse or Lernzentrum at some point while it's still open, to discuss the exercises or life in general. Okay, so that's about it with the first question that I have for you. I see that you already have some questions for us, so let's have a look at that. Okay, the first one is rather a comment than a question. So yes, there are cats. She might appear again, but currently she's sitting beside the camera and waiting for more interesting parts of the lecture, I guess. There's another interesting question. What's the difference between a PhD student and a PhD candidate? Oh, I'm sorry for creating some confusion here. So the main thing is that when you start a PhD, so as a doctoral student at our institute, you first start out as a PhD student, and after you're about halfway done with your doctoral studies, you're promoted to a PhD candidate. So you're more experienced than at that point, and are probably also more involved in teaching. So thanks for the questions, and we can now get back to the presentation part. Oh, there's one more that just appeared. When is the intro today for the practicals? We do have a very short introduction into the administrative part right during this lecture here. But the main presentation of the first task is going to be next week. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Oh, we have some couple more coming in. Oh dear. Let's see if we can finish them all. A lot of people are asking about favorite beers. To be honest, I don't have any. I'm more of a wine person. How about you, Daniel?
Also not really, no.
Okay. Will the KU part on Friday afternoon be recorded? Because I always work then.
Yes.
Yeah, so the main presentation is going to be recorded. There are some parts which are more interactive, and that's the question hours, which are not going to be on YouTube, but just live, where you can ask questions individually. So in particular, you also often get individual answers. It's not all in a big group, but all the stuff that concerns everybody is going to be available afterwards. Can you do the practicals alone? It's already disappeared.
Yeah, maybe I can mention that. So we have, as a first part and the first exercise for you, the group registration is already online in the Teach Center. So you should find a partner and then register for a group of 2. And we strongly prefer that you do this in a group of 2, in the sense that we will also try to merge any solo groups together. And this is mainly because we are so many people that if everyone has a solo group, we have essentially double the administrative effort for the exercise interviews and stuff like that. And the exercise interviews already take quite a long time. We have about 180 groups and then 15 minutes per exercise interview, 3 times a semester. So if we double this again, then we would need double the teaching assistants. So essentially the number of teaching assistants is kind of tailored to groups of 2. So we would strongly prefer if you do it in groups of 2. Of course, if we have an odd number of people, we can't make that happen. And also if somebody drops out during the semester, we will try to do our best to merge them again, but only if the points for the first exercises are somewhat similar. So we do not want to merge a very good group with a slightly worse group.
Very nicely put. Okay, there was a follow-up question to the beer question. I don't know. I think it's not so relevant to this course. Okay.
Yeah, maybe they're trying to bribe you.
Yeah, I think so. Well, in that case, I can say that I do love Styrian wines, but while in New Zealand, I did fall in love with the Sauvignon Blanc they have there. Okay. Groups of 4 make it even easier. Well, yes, but you do learn a lot less in groups of 4, I believe.
Yeah,
so.
In groups of 2, people try to contribute equally. In groups of 4, it's more often that somebody does a little bit less work than the rest. And also the workload at the moment is tailored for groups of 2. So if we have groups of 4, we would have to have double the exercises essentially. Yeah.
Okay, I see our entire concept is being challenged here. Okay, when is the next exam for InfoSec? Well, if you're from previous year's group and asking this, then the next exam is going to be in the central exam weeks in November. And that is going to be the last one for the previous year. We're going to start in January with the new exams for this year. So for the majority here, who's here for this year, it's going to be in January, end of January. I think the date is already on the website and later on the slides, but I don't know it by heart. So better check there. If you have any sort of emergency, you can also always ask for an oral exam date. Yeah. Okay, what else do we have here? Someone is studying Masters in ICE and they suggested to complete information security for 4 ECTS. I'm not sure what this means exactly, so I guess the question is whether you can do the lecture alone or whether you need to enroll for the practicals. So first of all, I have to say that the practicals are highly recommended. So if you really want to learn what's being done in this course, then you should do the practicals as well. If this is a legal question, so whether the requirement includes the course as well, this is a question that I can't answer, but you will need to ask your Dean of Studies who set you this requirement.
Yeah, so in general, there are 2 separate courses, and if there is no requirement to do the practicals, then you don't need to. But yeah, it kind of sounds like you got this as a requirement to study the masters, maybe because you are coming from abroad from a different bachelor degree or something like that. So there I would have a chat with the person who sent you this requirement.
Yeah. Okay, so this is answered. What else do we have? Are the exams online or on site? They are planned on campus. We did try the online version last year, but since we're from information security, we're not entirely happy with the outcome. So no, these are going to be on-site exams, so on campus, but of course in smaller groups and according to the hygiene regulations of TU Graz. We're going to come to that question back later, of course, so this is part of the main slide, so I don't want to go into too much detail. So we've answered this one. Oh dear, you do have a lot of questions. Are there practical group exercises also in the lecture, or is it just a lecture? Well, the lecture is just a lecture, so I'm just here talking. You can interact, and we hope you do, but you don't have to. Your grade comes entirely from the exam at the end. But of course, we highly recommend to do the exercises because you learn more. But we don't see the sense of having like a 2 exercise version with exercise in the lecture and in the KU. Are the tutors and the lecturers also in the Discord channel? Yes, of course. They are already there. You can see them marked in orange in the InfoSec channel. So you will need to sign up for the InfoSec channel in the Getting Started channel, but most of you probably know that already. And they are accessible there anytime. Please, if you contact them directly, target who you are asking. So if you have a question about my lecture, please ask me and not all the other lecturers. And similarly, if you have a question on a particular task, ask the teaching assistant who most recently talked about that or the exercise sessions or something.
Yeah, essentially we have 6 teaching assistants, and 2 of them are responsible for one of the 3 main topics, and they are listed on the exercise sheet as well, so you know who to ask directly. And in addition to just a chat, there will also be dedicated question hours where you can have a voice chat with the teaching assistants.
If you do use the question feature, we highly recommend that you use threading to keep things clean and easy to navigate, even for those who join a week later and are astonished by the tons and tons of messages. Are the assignment interviews online this year?
Yes, so in contrast to the lecture exams, we will do the assignment interviews online again. They will be 15-minute assignment interviews online with your teaching assistant, and you have to present and answer questions about your exercises. And it would be preferable if you would have a webcam to do this kind of face-to-face, but at least at the base level, you have to be able to share your screen and talk about your code.
When is the intro today for the practicals? We had that already. I just didn't mark it as answered. These question hours will come to the calendar in a moment. The next exam is already answered. When does the first assignment get published? We also already had that.
Yeah, next week in the practical slot in the afternoon.
Yes. Great. Okay, that's it with the questions for the moment. Let's come to the part in the slides where I actually wanted to talk about those. So the administrative information about this course. It seems that for some reason Menti is a bit lazy about refreshing. I see that's because there are more questions. We'll come to that question about the programming languages in a moment. Okay, let's see if we can get Menti to get back to the actual slides. Otherwise, we will have some annoying part always in the lecture. Let's try if refreshing helps. Apparently, it doesn't. Okay, that's great. I think we might need another short break because for some reason. Now it's working. Okay. Apparently very lazy about refreshing. Okay, so let's come to some of the questions that have already been asked and some other ones. First question, when is this course going to happen? So which times? Usually every Friday, the lecture in the morning. I'm sorry to all the non-morning persons like myself. We did have to start a bit earlier today because we're going to be kicked out of the room a bit earlier than usual. So usually we start around 9:30 and end about 11:45. And this is going to be usually split into 16 minutes of lecture, 10 or 15 minute break, plus another 60-minute lecture part. Then there's a long lunch break where you can do whatever you like. And afterwards, we do have the practicals starting at 1:30. These are not going to be every week, but most weeks. So please watch your calendar. And here, Daniel and the teaching assistants are going to present the assignments, give some tutorials, there will be question times, and so on. Okay, there's another when question, and that is when in this term is what going to happen. So it's very nicely aligned with the months, actually. All of October is going to be crypto month. So we're going to have 4 pure crypto lectures, and also the kickoff of the first crypto task next week. Then November is system security month, again with 4 lectures by Daniel, plus the kickoff of the next task. And that's also the date of the deadline of the first task. And finally, December and January, plus the break, are Christmas and network security months. Again, with the kickoff for the first task in early December and the deadline for the previous session here. We do have a small outro lecture where you can ask questions about the exam, but there is not much content planned. You will notice there is 1 lecture or 1 week missing here. That's a sort of backup slot that we are probably not going to use. And here is the exam date that somebody asked after. So at the end of January, we're going to have the first exam. But of course, you can choose any later date. So usually we have the first exams in smaller intervals, like 1 in January, 1 or 2 in February, 1 in March. And then a bit later, we're going to have more widely spaced exercise dates because there are fewer people taking them. And of course, we're going to adapt the number of exam dates to the interest there is. We notice in InfoSec a lot that people register for an exam date and then they all deregister on the very last day. But before that, they're all panicking about not getting a spot because the exam date is full. So don't worry, you will get your exam in approximately the time frame that you want to get it. We'll make sure of that. And please don't register until the last day if you already know 2 weeks beforehand that you're not actually going to take it. Okay, so this is the timeline part. Now a bit about the goals of this course, what you are going to take away. So first, for the cryptography part, it's very important to me that you really understand what the crypto algorithms we look at actually offer you. So what security properties they actually do have and what they don't have. And this is going to be the prerequisite for the actual main goal here, namely enabling you to be able to choose and properly apply the right crypto for whatever you need to get done. In the system security part, it's, as we said, about computing securely. So the goal here is that you learn about the risks when processing data, you learn how to detect certain kinds of vulnerabilities, and you also know how to protect. So in particular, you get to know isolation techniques and protection mechanisms that prevent exactly those vulnerabilities. So you'll be able to code safer and to set up your programs more safely. And finally, for the network part, it's all about the threats on the network protocol and web layer. So here the idea is that, as very often when we talk about networks, you look at the whole network stack, at all the abstraction layers, and understand what can go wrong at each step and how you defend against it. Some prerequisites. So there are a few courses that you already took that will make your life a lot easier, or at least that most of you took who are following the bachelor's degree program. One that is quite relevant for the cryptography part is discrete mathematics. So if you remember a bit about that, like a bit about how modular arithmetic works, your life here is going to be easier. The same holds for computer organization and networks, in particular for the network part. And the system security part is, surprise, surprise, somewhat related to system-level programming. And additionally, it's going to help if you're familiar with a couple of programming tools. Maybe you want to talk about which role they play in the lecture?
So there was this question earlier, what kind of programming languages we are using. And we have essentially things that you need to write yourself and things that you need to analyze. And as a generic spoiler for the exercises, you will be in the exercises our attacker. So the person we would actually try to protect against and learn how to protect against in the lecture. You will play the part of this attacker in the exercises to see and better understand what an attacker can actually do, how mistakes and things that are done badly can be exploited, so that you gain a deeper understanding of then in the next step better to protect against that. And for that, you need to read and learn about the existing programs, scripts that you get. And these will be written mostly in Python for the cryptography and the networking part, and in C and C++ for the system security part. So it would be nice to have a good and base familiar understanding with those two languages, especially with Python, because all of the solutions you will produce should be in Python. Yeah. For the system security part, it helps if you have worked a little bit with debuggers, so to step through programs and have a look at individual instructions, and also maybe to have a look at the generated assembly code. And this is especially useful, as I said, for the system security part. In contrast to the past years, we no longer have any Java requirements in the course, so this might be a nice thing for some
That's
of you.
a relief.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So a question that's probably rather important to you. By the way, we're going to come to the other important questions as soon as I have an empty white slide where I can put them. So how do you get a grade? First question, how do you get it for the practicals? So I need to fetch it then.
Okay, so for the practicals, the first task that you have right now is to form a team of 2 until next week, Friday midnight. If you do not form a team until then, you cannot do the course. So this is the main part that you have to do right now. If you do not have a partner yet, in our Discord channel, InfoSec, there's also an InfoSec group search channel where you can just advertise that you are looking for a partner, find other partners, exchange a little bit, and then register for a group together. With that team of 2, you have 3 exercises. And essentially these 3 assignments correspond directly to the 3 topics of cryptography, system security, and networking. And all of them have exactly 1/3 of the points of the course. And together you just have to achieve 50% of these points for a positive grade, and then the grading scale is linear above that. More on the exact details and on the point scheme will be next week. But this is the basic overview.
Okay, and now the other question, how to get a grade for the lecture? Well, we already mentioned the final written exam that you take. It takes about 60 minutes. You don't need any materials or so. It's a simple, standard, old-fashioned pen and paper exam. The questions are going to be in English, but if there is any confusion about anything, feel free to ask during the exam. You can also answer in English or German as you prefer. This is the main way how to get a grade. If you're not in Graz at the moment, or if you're quarantined around the time of the exam, or if there are any other reasons why you can't come to the campus, we do offer a backup solution, and that is a virtual oral exam, where the lecturers are going to ask you the questions about their part. The questions are very, very similar to the written exam, but we discuss your answers instead of you writing them down. The first opportunity, as already mentioned before, is going to be at the end of January. Is there any other important thing to know about the exam? I think we will look at a few example exam questions at the end of the cryptography part. Otherwise, the exam is structured very similarly to the exercises and the lecture, namely, you have the 3 parts. You get 2 pages of questions for each part. You answer those, and that's about it. It's a mix of questions where you actually need to explain something, or maybe solve you get a little piece of code and need to solve some question about it. But there are also other quick questions, like some multiple choice questions, or some filling gaps where you need to put in, like, I don't know, how many possible ciphertexts there are for a particular block cipher or something like that. So it's a mix of different kinds of questions where we aim at getting different sorts of knowledge and skills out of you and judge whether you have them. Most of this is pretty much independent of the corona traffic light, because no matter which color that is, the current plan does allow written on-campus exams. We're going to use them. The lectures are all virtual anyways. The exercises are going to be virtual anyways. Of course, you can meet in person to work on your solution, but our evaluation part and the tutorials are all going to be virtual. For the few parts that are on campus, namely the written exams, there is said backup solution. It is, of course, possible that everything goes horribly wrong in a way not currently foreseen in the traffic light scenario. So if everything turns out a lot worse than expected, we're probably going to organize larger virtual exams. But I don't really believe that this is going to happen, and it's not part of the TU Corona plan anyways. There are a couple of important links. Now, of course, you can't click them on the YouTube stream, but you can click them on the slides, and they're short enough to type. So in particular, we do have a course website where you find all the information. You always find the lecture slides there shortly before each lecture. So that's IAK, TU Graz AT, whatever, and InfoSec. There's a Discord server that we already mentioned. Here's a short link to get there. We have two main groups where you write, namely the main discussion group and the group search channel. We do also have a channel for announcements where we try to keep the most important parts in an easy to navigate way so that you don't need to read all the backlog in the main channel. We also do have use Teach Center this year, namely for the team registration. So this is where you should head as soon as possible, as soon as you've found a partner. You can also find the link on the course website, of course. There is not going to be much information in the Teach Center, I believe, so most of the administrative stuff and exercise sheets are going to be on the main course website. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll try to mirror them if necessary.
Okay, great. Okay, and finally, some ways of finding help. So if you do have a question, please try this in the order that's written here. First, just ask on Discord, whatever it is about, either in the main channel or if it's about your specific tool or so, and the teaching assistant has invited personal questions, then you can ask them directly. And similarly, if you have a very personal issue with an exam or something, you can also contact one of us directly. You can also contact them in any other ways that they offer. So if they offer email or so, or if there's question hour, do that. We also have a mailing list that goes to all the lecturers of the course. We usually need this very rarely, but in case there is an emergency or something, try that. Most of this course is going to be in videos, which you can also watch later at any time. So if you didn't understand part of an explanation or so, just give it another try. If this year's explanation doesn't convince you, you can also look up last year's explanation and see if it was slightly different. But if you're the kind of person who just prefers to read solid text about topics, there are lots of good books about information security that can help you in the course. I've picked out one here because it's very recent and up to date, and because you can find an official online version as well. So that's the Tools and Jewels book by Van Oschot. But you're not going to need it as a basis for the course. So everything you need to know is discussed in the videos and on the slides. Okay, now I can finally come to all the questions that we had in the meantime. Do you recommend to work on Linux or Windows is the first question, and Menti again takes some while to refresh, but maybe you can answer it in the meantime.
So I guess it's for the exercises. So essentially we support both. On Windows, I would highly recommend doing it in the Linux subsystem for Windows. So that is essentially the main way to get a good working experience on Windows. If you do not have that, you can still work on Windows for most things, but especially for the system security exercises, you will need to be able to run Docker, because the exercises are containerized in a way that you only are able to access the secret file that you need to read if you do actually exploit the program. So you cannot just open the file from your solution script. And to get this setup all working like we do on the automated test system, we essentially mirror the environment of the automated test system down to you in the form of a Docker container. to ease all of this setting up, we will also offer you a virtual machine image that you can use for the exercises if you want. That is essentially a standard Ubuntu machine, so Linux in that case.
Okay. Next question. Can you deregister from a group of 2? You clicked unintentionally. Okay.
Okay, if you cannot do that at the moment, I will enable that right now. So this is the first time we're actually using the Teach Center and the registration process. And apparently this is not enabled by default, which I didn't know. So good that somebody tried that. So I will enable this right after this lecture.
And if you still have issues, I guess you can ask
if
Daniel
it
to
doesn't
kick you
work,
out.
if it doesn't work in the afternoon to deregister, please just send me a mail. Yeah.
Okay, an attempt of bribery. I guess that's not very effective.
Add a few more zeros, like 6 or so, then we can talk.
Well, but actually, I think if you watch the videos and if you actually think about what you hear, it's not gonna be, that difficult to get a positive grade. I can only speak about the lecture part. I don't know if you can say something about the exercise. Of course, there is some work involved.
Yeah, of course, you have to do some work, but yeah, it's, I would say, easy to pass the course if you do invest the time.
Arch, by the way, no, sorry.
Also not me, no.
No.
Yeah.
The exact date of the next exam in November? No, because it hasn't been confirmed yet. So that should be done in a few days. And as soon as it's done, we will also enter it in TU Graz online. If it doesn't suit you and you're for some reason very urgently needing the exam done, then you can also contact me for a virtual oral exam. So if you happen to have a collision on the specific date in November. Well, let's ignore that. Do you recommend any literature in regards of the discrete mathematics part? Well, I think the main thing that we are going to talk about is modular arithmetic. So I can maybe post a link to the necessary Wikipedia article or two in the Discord.
I think there are also some.
I guess you're all familiar with the modulo operator, right?
Yeah.
Like 5 modulo 3 equals 2, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially going to be the thing that we really need.
Yeah. And I guess, I don't know if you have some basic recap of this stuff. Otherwise, we can add a little bit of background in the practical slides. You will only need this at a very, very basic level. So you will not need to do any proofs. It just helps if you know that this is actually possible and works out.
Yeah, I'm also going to re-explain it in the lecture, but it might take a bit longer for you to process it, and then you might find it hard to follow the rest of the video. But the good thing is we do have recordings from last year, so I can check if my explanation there was acceptable, and in that case I can send the video link to Discord. Okay, so that's this one. Oh, well, that's sweet. I guess this was referred at Hexen, maybe. Let's see if she decides to rejoin us at a later date. Is the lecture Information Security recommended if I pre-watched Con and SLP but do the exercises in this semester too?
I mean, I guess this depends on you. So I guess you're probably earlier in your bachelor if you do the Con and system level programming exercises this semester. Yeah.
I think the lecture covers the most important parts actually. Yeah. So in particular for the network part, it's about knowing the different layers and so on. Yeah. If you do that, you can definitely follow the lecture here. Mm-hmm. For the exercises, you might need to do a bit of reading, but I don't think it has any strong dependencies because most of the exercises in Con are, I think, focused on the computer architecture part as far as I know, and that one is not going to be. Yeah, and also the networking part of Con is really more focused on the lower level networking stack, whereas I think here in this course the networking part is more focused on the higher levels of the stack and the application level. So they are more, it helps to know what kind of layers there are for the networking, but you do not need to know this in depth already. Yeah, and also I think the timing is on your side here. because I think if you do the SLP exercises this semester, there is a lot that already starts at the beginning of the term. So in particular, the main synchronization concepts and so on, that's in the beginning of the term. Whereas we are only going to get to this part in November, and the deadline is in December. So I think that actually should work out.
Yeah. But what is recommended is if you do the exercises in information security, you should also do the lecture because they're very closely tied together.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so where are we? Is there a minimum number of points to be achieved per assignment, or can you stop when you have a positive grade? Well, of course, we don't recommend that, but...
Yeah, so the official rules are you do not have to have a minimum number of points per assignment. The total number of points you achieve over all assignment has to be more than 50%. But also in conjunction with that rule is that we do not offer any second chance for these assignments. So because they are not required to pass, we do not offer a second chance that you can hand in later. So you only have one shot to submit something per assignment. I mean, you can submit many times before the deadline, but there's only a single deadline.
Okay. Can you elaborate in short what differs from last year's lecture? Yeah, I can do that quite easily. The main difference is the network part, because Johannes, who did the lecture part last year, left Graz, and now we have a new lecturer for the network part. So while the main theme is going to be the same, the individual lectures are going to be quite different. We are also adding a few more focus points, like I mentioned already, privacy, for example. So we're trying to make it a bit more applied and connected to what you actually encounter or are going to encounter in terms of security topics in the future. There are also some small differences in the other lecture parts. So for example, I'm going to rearrange some topics, like in which lecture they appear, or I might put a bit more emphasis on parts where I felt during last year's exams that I didn't really get across what I wanted to get across, but no significant differences. So in case you learn based on last year's materials, then everything except for the network part should go very smoothly. For the exercises?
Yeah, for the exercises, it's essentially the same thing, where the network part is a little bit different. So in the last years, the networking part was more of a constructive exercise where you had to build something. And in this year, we've aligned it with the rest of the exercises where you are the attacker also in the networking part. So for all of the different topics in the exercises, you are the attacker and you need to break stuff.
Yeah, of course, there are some new challenges, but they're going to focus on similar themes.
Of course, So the challenges are going to be different, but the themes and stuff like that are very similar.
Okay, what else do we have here? A question from an exchange student, and you are doing both this semester. Is it okay and possible? Well, yes, I think so. In particular, let me think. I think the network parts are actually synced between the two. So I think we're going to sync it so that the network part in Con is before the network part in InfoSec.
Yeah, and it's also done by the same person. So the networking part in Con will happen in the first half of the semester before December, and then the same lecturer that does the Con network lectures will do the networking lectures in InfoSec starting from December. So this is intended in some fashion, yes.
Yeah. The network part also differs for the KU? Yes. Well, no, he's not. I can definitely state that. So, is there any chance... Oh god, it's not syncing again. Oh, I love this Menti thing when it gets stuck. So the actual next question is there any chance that we can reschedule the question and lecture part so that the questions are answered at the end? Well, usually we do this, but I think if there is a question, in particular now on the administrative part, we should settle that in the very beginning, and it doesn't make much sense to cover it only at the very end. So usually in the lecture, I have one or two spots where there are a lot of questions, and otherwise in the meantime there are not going to be so many questions in the follow-up lectures, because most of them were really administrative.
Yeah, I guess for the kickoffs for the exercises, I also have planned to have a very large question block at the end, and to keep the main focus on the questions right there. Yeah, for the administrative stuff, it might make sense to have a short question interlude between the administrative stuff again and the presentation of the first exercise.
Mm-hmm. Can you pre-upload all slides now? Well, I am going to pre-upload the lectures always, the slides always before the lecture, so that should enable you to take shiny notes. If you want to have a sneak peek at what's going to come, you can check out last year's website, which is linked on this year's website, and find the old slides. But there are going to be some small differences. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, also for the exercises, we'll also upload the presentation for the kickoff before the kickoff actually happens.
Yeah. If you're an early riser, I usually upload the slides the night before, but like really late the night before. So if you get up at 6, you can also pre-take notes on that.
In general, it should probably be up 1 hour before the course at the latest.
Yeah. Is P also in Java? No.
No, yeah. This is the main point of difference, as said before.
Are there no alternatives to Menti that don't permanently get stuck? Well, that's a very good question. I've been wondering that the same. We didn't really have that problem last term, so I hope it's a temporary thing. Okay, let's see if we can get it unstuck and get to the presentation point. No, there are more questions. In OS, you weren't graded if you failed the course. Is it the same here? Well, if you go to the exam, you get a grade in any case.
Yeah.
I think last year this was in particular because not all rules were clear at the beginning of the term, because we didn't know what would be coming in terms of COVID. Mm-hmm. So that's the main reason.
For the exercises, if you submit something, you get a grade. So if you submit a solution to the first assignment, you will get a grade, be it positive or negative. So in a sense, you have the first assignment to decide if you really don't want to do it. And then if you don't submit anything to any of the exercises, you will not get a grade. But if you submit to something, to any deadline, you will get a grade.
Are there CTFs? Yes, I think they are.
Yeah, so
because the style in the exercises is quite different.
The style in the exercises is quite similar to a CTF. So for anyone who doesn't know what a CTF is, it's a capture the flag event, and it's a term that's also not used for physical capture the flag events, but also for virtual capture the flag events, where you have, in general, some kind of microservice that you need to exploit in some fashion, be it via web vulnerabilities, crypto vulnerabilities, or system security vulnerabilities, to get access to a flag. And the flag in that context is just mostly a text document with a secret string that tells you that you've solved the challenge. So these kind of sites that you see here are, I guess, available for everyone to get a view of what CTF challenges are like. We also have a local CTF team here that hosts their own CTF site that you can try out a few more challenges. But I would say, in contrast to most dedicated CTF sites, our challenges are more introductory and more beginner friendly than many of these CTF challenges, where you can invest multiple hours really debugging and looking at assembly code in many cases. So they are good to have a look at if you want to dive more into these topics, but it's not necessary at all to go on the internet and do preparation for the InfoSec exercises.
Okay, are there bonus points attending the lecture? No, sorry, but you can rewatch the lecture later, of course. Okay, I guess that's not directed to us. Somebody would prefer if some unnecessary audience questions are asked in Discord and not here. Yeah, thanks, that would be great, because actually we need to be finished in 35 minutes and we haven't even started the main lecture part. So thanks for that. We'll discuss that offline, I guess. Are there also practical exercises in the exam? Well, a little bit. So we have a few tasks where you get like a small code snippet similar to what Daniel covers in his lecture, and you get asked what is the bug in there, or what is the side channel, or what is the issue. But mostly it's focused on knowledge, because you did show the practical skills in the exercises. Okay, here we go with the questions. Let's finally get back to the actual lecture part and talk a little bit about some information security terminology. So a very, very brief introduction only. The first question that I do want to answer here is what exactly we mean by security and what we don't mean. This is in particular relevant if you're coming from German, because in German we have one word, Sicherheit, which covers actually a number of different concepts or different words in English, and only some of them are relevant for this course. So if you look at this picture, I guess you see a few features that you associate with Sicherheit. So in particular, you might notice that there's a helmet hanging there, there's a lock at the bike locking it to the environment, but only one of the two is called Sicherheit in English. So in particular, we have two words, safety and security. Safety is what the helmet is for. So safety means you're protected from physical harm or from something happening where nobody actually did anything malicious. So you're protected against accidents. But IT security is not so much about that, not so much related to health. It's more related about security. And security is what we call it whenever we think about an adversary who tries to circumvent some of the issues that we, or some of the mechanisms that we have. So this course is predominantly going to talk about security. So we're always going to have some evil guy, which we either call attacker or adversary. The one word is just slightly fancier than the other, but they mean more or less the same thing. So what does the word security mean if we look at it etymologically? It actually comes from Latin, you might have guessed that, and it's composed of two parts. So the first one is set and the second one cura. So it actually means something like without anxiety, freedom from anxiety. So it means you have security when you don't have to worry about stuff. But of course, in practice, you always have stuff to worry about. And we call this stuff assets in information security. So an asset is anything like a piece of information or a service or a device that has a value to someone. So to the legitimate owner, for example. So this could be, for example, that your money has value to you and thus the credit card you're using it with. Your photos have value to you in the sense that you want to make sure they stay available and you don't maybe want any of them to leak. Your passwords have value to you because you don't want anyone to impersonate you or steal your identity. If you sign something and committing to it, this has value, and so on. So whenever we are working in information security, we need to do something about this. We need to identify exactly what the assets are. So this is the very first thing if we want to protect anything. We need to define what we protect. And actually, if we look at information security, and in particular, if we look at cryptography, we notice that what the mechanisms do is they actually shift the load of protecting one asset to something that is easier to protect. So for example, we shift the load of protecting all your individual files to the load of just protecting the one password that you encrypted them with. And in particular, what makes an asset valuable are its security properties. So this is something about the asset that you like. For example, you might like that your photos are confidential. You might like that your bank balance remains, so it keeps its integrity. It's not modified by anyone else. You like about a contract, for example, that it is authentic. It actually is signed by the person you believe it is signed by. Or availability. It's valuable to you that your files are actually available, or that an internet service is available and not, for example, suffering from a DDoS attack or something. So these are the main ones that we very often talk about, and they are actually so often talked about that they have their own acronym. So they are called the CIA security properties, because whenever you talk about security, you always encounter them at least. Where for some people the A stands for availability and for some it stands for authenticity. I'm not going to decide on that, let's just leave it at that. There are, however, also quite a number of other security properties that only appear sometimes. Some of them are anonymity. So this is different from confidentiality. Confidentiality means you have some data that you don't want to be seen. Anonymity means there is some data, but you don't want to see whom they pertain to. Non-repudiation means if somebody commits to something, they shouldn't later be able to deny it. We're going to cover these terms in more detail in the next lectures. Sometimes you want to commit to something, like to a prediction or to a certain bet or something. You want to say in the bet in advance what you bet, and afterwards you are held to account for it. You maybe want to link a specific timestamp to stuff, something like that. Things get dangerous whenever something can go wrong. And something that could go wrong is called a threat. So this is a potential violation of security. So this is what you want to analyze in the beginning in a security analysis. What potential threats there are to the security properties. So what you do about it is you usually add some mechanisms to minimize the relevant threats. So you add counter mechanisms and protection mechanisms until the remaining threats are acceptable. For example, because they are very unlikely or because the damage they do is very small. But a threat is just a possibility of what could go wrong. When you actually have a problem, then this is called a vulnerability. So this means there is a concrete flaw, a concrete weakness in your system. So for example, if you think of a password database, a threat would be that somebody could read your passwords. It doesn't specify how this could work. A vulnerability could be if your password that you use for to protect your password database is very weak. Or another vulnerability would be if you use weak crypto to protect it, to encrypt it. So that's an actual concrete issue. Somebody made a mistake and it could be exploited. And your job about this is to prevent and detect these vulnerabilities. So you usually need to test whether all your security features that you think are in place are actually there and do something about it in case they are not. Because otherwise, invariably, somebody is going to exploit the vulnerability, so to actually use it to execute a specific attack. So I hope you get the difference between these three. So a threat is a theoretical thing that could happen. A vulnerability is a flaw introduced by the developer of the system that could allow the threat to come true. And an attack is as soon as an adversary actually appears and does something, tries to exploit the vulnerability. So when this has already happened, there are still things to do for you. So it's not all lost, it's not all over, but you try to fix the problem. You provide information to the people who are affected by it. And of course, in advance, you also prepare for the possibility that attacks could appear. For example, by introducing mechanisms how you could get rid of vulnerabilities when you discover them. By logging so that you can afterwards actually understand and find out what happened, and so on. And so these are the individual steps from the thing you want to protect to an actual attack. And the goal of information security is to make sure that this chain here is broken at some point. So the security properties are identified and you have mechanisms in place to prevent that there are to prevent the threats, so to minimize the attack surface. You do want to make sure that you introduce no vulnerabilities. You do this by auditing your code, by checking that and testing that everything is as it should be. And you want to prevent that the vulnerability leads to an actual attack or that the attack does any damage. And you do this by, for example, keeping a clear overview of your system, trying to detect when something goes wrong, and then managing it. And one of the things that helps in breaking this chain is cryptography. So I want to give a brief introduction about this as well. Cryptography, which doesn't come from Latin this time, but from Greek, and is about writing secrets, actually means the mathematical background that we have that is the basis of all information security. So it's essentially all the math that goes on whenever you have something like this lock symbol in your browser. So whenever you have a security mechanism implemented, you usually have some math inside that does the actual work. And in cryptography, we want to look inside this padlock and want to see how this math actually works. So what building blocks there are, what ingredients there are, and so on. And this also maps directly to the model of what secure communication is actually about. So whenever we talk about two people, Alice and Bob, who want to talk to each other, send each other messages, there are two possible situations. One of the situations is that they have a trusted channel, so some way of communicating that they trust. If this is the case, all is good, there is no need for us to do anything. But very often they don't have this trusted channel, they have a so-called untrusted channel. And we always put faces to things, so in particular, an untrusted channel means there is an adversary, whom we usually call Eve, which is derived from eavesdropping, that's Eve's job, but also manipulating is Eve's job. So Eve is interested, has some sort of access to this communication channel and tries to exploit this for her own nefarious purposes. Whereas Alice and Bob are usually the good guys who just want to talk to each other. And what cryptography does in this setting is it provides an algorithm, a mechanism, how Alice can prepare her communication, so protect her messages, with the help of some key. So she plugs the key and her message into this algorithm, gets some sort of output. In the classical case, when we do encryption, we call this output the ciphertext. But whatever we call it, it's a piece of information that can safely be transmitted over an untrusted channel. And Bob, the recipient, has the inverse algorithm, the corresponding inverse key, and he plugs the ciphertext, or in some cases it's also called cryptogram, into this algorithm together with his key and gets back the original message. Now so this is the setting where we're worried mostly about an eavesdropping Eve. If we worry about a manipulating Eve, we might also add some additional verification information here. We'll get to that next week. So what are some important words here that people often get messed up? Some basic terminology. We do have Alice and Bob, who are our good guys, our insiders, who just want to talk. We also very often call them parties or entities. So entities are just specific roles that you have in the system. In a very simple case, it's just two people talking, but it might also be more complicated. There might be, for example, a trusted server or some additional parties. We do have an adversary or attacker, that's Eve. And then we have some pieces of data that they juggle around. We usually call the plain stuff, so the actual information or asset, that's the message. In case we talk about encryption, so making this message unreadable, then the plain message is also called the plain text. And the encrypted version of it is called the ciphertext. Notice that it's not called cipher. Many people often call it cipher, but the cipher is the actual algorithm to translate this into this. And the ciphertext is the actual output that you get. Then you have some keys, where Alice and Bob might have the same keys or different keys. We are going to get to that next week. And we have the processes that they are executing. And these consist actually of several layers. And two of the terms that appear very often here that might sound a bit vague to you are the terms of cryptographic scheme and cryptographic protocol. By scheme, we usually mean a specific algorithm that one person executes and that protects a certain security property. So two examples of cryptographic schemes are an encryption scheme and the corresponding decryption scheme. So these are algorithms that map the plain text to a ciphertext based on the key. And then we have the protocol, which tells us how to actually employ this scheme to get information or to get communication going. So if we look back at the previous slide, these yellow boxes, golden boxes, these are the cryptographic schemes or algorithms, and the process of how they distribute the keys and if they communicate for longer, how they arrange the messages get here and back and so on. This is the protocol. So a protocol is usually a list of steps that involves multiple parties. And it tells which schemes each of them executes and which pieces of data they send to each other or how they protect them. That's what the protocol is about. And one of the very fundamental principles of cryptography is that these two things here should be public. So this might sound relatively random, but it's actually a very fundamental principle that changed cryptography quite a lot from what it was in its early historic stages to what it is now. So Kerckhoffs' principle by Auguste Kerckhoffs states the following. It says that a crypto system or a protocol should be secure even if everything about the system except for the secret key is public knowledge. So in other words, it says something like cryptography should be open source. All the used algorithms should be published. People should be able to analyze them, to check them for weaknesses, and the only thing that actually protects the exchange should be the key. So that's the only thing that people keep secret. So just keeping secret a single short bit string rather than the entire description of the scheme. Has also been rephrased in several different ways. So for example, Claude Shannon phrases it as, you should always assume that the enemy knows the system. There is also a term for the opposite, and that is security by obscurity. So if you try to achieve your security by hiding all the details about your process, security by obscurity, then you violate Kerckhoffs' principle. What are some of the advantages of this approach? Well, one very clear advantage is that if the scheme is public, then qualified people, cryptographers, can actually analyze it, find out whether there are any vulnerabilities. There is also another motivation for cryptographers to have things public, because in the times before this was the rule, well, a cryptographer was kind of always in danger, because whenever they came up with a new crypto system for some king or emperor or somebody, not only the people who used them knew the system, but also the cryptographer. So there was always the danger that this information could leak. And of course, there are some very easy means how to get rid of this danger, but they are not to the advantage of the cryptographer. So I'm personally very thankful that Auguste gave us this principle, and it's relatively widely accepted at the moment. There are also, however, some advantages, because of course, you do get a tiny bit of extra security if you don't tell people how you're working. So there might be lots of vulnerabilities, but if the scheme is not public, the adversary probably doesn't know about them. The thing is that this very often doesn't work properly, because adversaries or attackers are incredibly resourceful when it comes to finding out how something works. They might try to get this information directly, or they may try to get this indirectly by just observing the device or observing what's going on. And I think the argument is very similar to open source. In the end, it's usually better if the code is public, it can be vetted by everyone, it increases trust in the system. It also makes it easier to use, because if you would have to protect your entire system, so the entire algorithm, this is a lot harder than just protecting this one bit string that is the key. So for this reason, it's quite widely accepted now. So in particular, most of the crypto schemes that are widely used are also published. They are usually standardized, and they usually have quite a history of being analyzed in all detail. There are still some industries where it's more popular to use secret algorithms, but the thing is, you very regularly read about those in the news, because invariably at some point the algorithm always leaks, and then it's always horribly full of vulnerabilities. So newspapers are here to prove that Kerckhoffs' principle is actually a good thing. Now, I did mention that the schemes are all public and standardized, which brings me to the question, do you know any of them? So are there any examples of crypto algorithms that you have already heard about? Please give me your suggestions. If you don't know where to start, you probably heard about one cryptographic algorithm in the discrete mathematics lecture. Wow, we're starting off with a rather advanced one that I guess not many people know, and even fewer people can spell out correctly. Let's see. So I was, of course, earlier referring to RSA as the scheme that you have probably already learned about in discrete mathematics. This is a so-called asymmetric scheme, which we are going to cover in 3 weeks' time. In the same category is also ED 25519, which we're not going to cover in detail, but which is a great algorithm, and which is one of the building blocks of TLS. Where is it? Which is actually not a cryptographic algorithm, but a protocol. So it involves a lot of algorithms. Some of them are asymmetric, like RSA, or for example, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange we see here, whereas others are symmetric. Symmetric means both parties have the same key material. And the most famous example of that is the AES. One of whose designers, by the way, worked at EIK for a few years around the time of the standardization of AES. We also have hash functions like SHA-3 and SHA-2, I saw that somewhere. So these are called symmetric key, even though they don't have a key at all. What else do we have here? We have some classical history examples. So the very oldest one that is relatively widely known is the Caesar cipher, which you may also have encountered when you learned how to program. So very old, horribly insecure, but still easy to get into the topic. What else do we have? I saw the Spartan cipher here. So this is actually called Skitale. And it was a very old-fashioned thing, which I might discuss briefly next week, but it primarily involved a piece of wood and a strip of paper and nothing else. What else do we have? We have some rather new designs. So SPEC, designed by the NSA, or the Cha-Cha cipher, which you can also select in TLS, and which is designed by a well-known cryptographer. The same as Salsa. What else do we have here? Two-fish, that's one of the more old-fashioned things. We have one more thing here that's not actually a crypto algorithm, but again, a sort of protocol. That's OpenPGP. So it's a protocol and the associated tool. Somebody actually knows ASCON. That's really sweet. That's one of our own designs, which we're hoping to get standardized very soon. Let's see, we'll know by the end of the term. What else do I see here? We have ROD 13 here, which is rather infamous. What else do we have here? Steganography is a sort of related field to cryptography, where you don't actually use maths to encrypt your scheme, but you try to hide your messages somewhere. We have another example of protocols here. So SSH is a protocol, and YubiKey is a device and a protocol. What else do we have here? Invisible ink, a very classical thing that can be sort of seen or sorted into the steganography area. Let's see, it gets smaller and smaller. Which ones do I not have yet? Kermit, missed that one. Here's another historic cipher, Visionaire. We have HMAC, that's the first mention I see of a message authentication code here in this collection. Which other ones do I not have yet? Ooh, somebody's talking about cryptocurrencies. Not my favorite topic. We have elliptic curve cryptography somewhere. It just disappeared. What else do we have? Triple DES. That's a very old standard, and DES, which is rather outdated these days. A surprising number of people know Blowfish. That's interesting. I guess that's because it's available in many password managers, I think. So it's about as old as the AES and was often seen as a sort of competition for AES. Okay, I think we're sort of stabilizing here, but there are still a few new ideas coming in. Let's see if there's any more I missed, except the Bitcoin stuff. I guess that's about it. I'm sorry if I missed yours, but they just keep switching around so fast. So I'm really impressed how many different algorithms you already know. I was expecting RSA and maybe AES, but definitely not this world, and I definitely wasn't expecting ED25519 to show up first. Okay, thanks a lot for all your inputs, and I think I need to shut this down now so that we still have 10 minutes for the final questions. So let's see. So what's the conclusion of what I've talked about so far? We talked a bit about information security, some terms there like protecting assets against adversaries to break this chain of security properties, potential threats, concrete flaws and vulnerabilities, and actually executed attacks. We also had a very, very brief look at crypto, the mathematical foundation that enables breaking this chain here, with the help of algorithms that transform data so that it can be sent over an untrusted channel. And here we have already seen the first step towards creating a new asset, because instead of protecting the plaintext message, the original asset, we now need to protect the key. So how are we going to continue in the next weeks on these topics? So here's a short lecture outlook for October. Next week, we first start looking at symmetric authentication. So symmetric refers to the kind of key we're looking at, and authentication means we try to protect the integrity of data. We're going to meet two different kinds of crypto schemes here, hash functions on the one hand and message authentication codes on the other hand. The one is without a key, the one is with a key. And we're also going to have some very basics at the beginning where I want to define more precisely what a key is, what entropy is, where the key comes from, stuff like that. The week after that, we're going to talk about another security property, namely confidentiality. So keeping stuff secret. And the mechanisms to do that are encryption scheme. And we are also going to look at those, in particular at so-called authenticated encryption schemes. And we're also going to look a bit deeper inside, because all of these here are sort of a bit on the surface. So we're looking at the cryptographic scheme, but what they need inside to be able to operate is a so-called cryptographic primitive. And that's the actual core of the security. The schemes just use this core to achieve a particular security property. And the AES is one of these cores, and we're going to look at it. Afterwards, so around mid-October, we're going to switch to asymmetric cryptography, which is really necessary to get communication kick-started in the first place. So this involves things like exchanging keys, signing each other's identities, for example, as well as other asymmetric primitives that we can use to build these two. So here the RSA is going to come into play. And finally, in the last week of the crypto part, we want to go a step towards practice. So this is all foundations, and here we are going to look at how they're actually used. So we're going to look at protocols, specifically TLS, and other applications where all this stuff is used. And we also have here an assortment of different topics that didn't really fit elsewhere. Like, for example, typical crypto vulnerabilities, as well as a preview of the exam. So this is InfoSec for October, but there are also other things going on in October. So in particular, if you're now in the 5th term, you might be thinking about where to do your bachelor's thesis. And you might also be enrolled to the course Verfassen wissenschaftliche Arbeiten, or in English, Introduction to Scientific Working. You can do this at any institute, but in particular, you can do this at IIK. So if you like what you hear about in this course, or if you like one of the previous IIK lectures, like for example, Con or operating systems or system level programming or logic, then these bachelor's theses might be interesting for you. We do have an event where we present them all, and this event is also the registration deadline if you want to do verfassenwissenschaftliche Arbeiten with us. So this is going to be in 2 weeks' time. It's going to be a virtual event on Thursday, 14th of October, around lunchtime. And there we're going to present which bachelor and ESV topics we have. We're also going to hand out awards to excellent students who did projects with us in the last year and even got the results published as scientific publications. And if you want to find more about this, here are 2 URLs. The first one covers all the actual topics that you can choose from, or at least some examples for topics. Because of course, you might also agree on a new one that interests you personally with your supervisor. And the bottom one is about introduction to scientific working, how this works with us, an approximate time schedule, and so on. So as part of this introduction to scientific working, so you first choose a topic, we then have some units together that we call writing labs, where we look at how to write a paper or a thesis or something like that. And then you're going to work with your personal supervisor, so usually one of the IIK lecturers or doctoral students, to get a small report and presentation done at the end of the term. We still have a few free slots, but not too many. So if you're interested, you should be quick. Okay, so that's enough with the advertisements. We now have time again for your questions. Let's see how stuck they are. A bit stuck, let's put it like that. Let's refresh it again and see whether something appears. It looks like I have to read them off. Okay, so when can we theoretically start with the exercises? When do we know enough from the lecture to start with the crypto practicals? After all, 4 crypto lectures? Question mark.
So the exercises are handed out next week, and yeah, we hand all of them out at once, and they cover essentially the whole lecture topic. So starting from the first lecture and going up until the 4th or maybe the 3rd. So you should start as early as possible, essentially. And as probably you're used to from other exercises, you have to invest some time to research stuff yourself. So not everything is covered word for word with an explanation on how to solve this in the lecture. So you have to put in some research yourself. But the slides and of course the explanations from the lecture are a good starting point to get you thinking about how these primitives work, because that's one of the main points you have to understand, and then on how to solve the exercises.
In particular, the exercises consist of several small tasks, and some of them are already solvable, I think, with the first lecture next week.
Yeah.
For others, you will have to wait for the last one, but you can definitely start right after they are handed out, working on the first tasks.
You should. So, as in all exercises, the bulk of the work mostly happens in the last week, and also the bulk of the questions, and also, many people submit in the last few hours. So try to space it out a little bit more. It would help you probably in your further study life. So
and you also get some nice reward when you get your first tasks done, because they can be finished on their own. So, will we talk about TPM, since it's kind of new in news at the moment due to Windows 11? Just a tiny bit. So, we will talk about the basics. I think it might pop up as part of the system security stuff, but only to a very limited extent, I think.
Not directly, somewhat related. There are some master level courses that go into more detail about this.
Yeah, but thanks for the suggestion. So, since it's currently in the news, it might be a good time to bring it up more prominently in the lecture. We'll discuss that. What's the difference between an assistant prof and a normal prof? Well, important questions. The concept is a bit different in that, so there are 2 ways to get a longer term contract at university. You can either be what is called in German berufen. So this usually means you're already very advanced in your career, you're at a different university, and now TU Graz calls you here. Then you turn into a regular prof, so in German Universitätsprofessor. And an assistant prof is associated with what is called a Laufbahnstelle in German. So this means when you start this, you're at an earlier stage of your career, and you first need to satisfy a number of requirements. You have 6 years to do that. You have to do a lot of stuff, get a lot of stuff published, do teaching and so on. And if you do all that, then you get afterwards an associate professor title. So yeah, but it's not assistant in the sense that we help a normal prof, but we're just more junior, but we still have our own groups that we build up. Are there exact definitions of these keywords asked in the exam? Well, I don't want you to copy word for word what is written on the slides, but for example, what I have asked in the past is like the reverse. So there was a question like, here's the description of a vulnerability. What is this called? A threat, B, a vulnerability, C, an attack. So you should know what the words mean. You should understand the difference between them. But I really don't care if you remember the sentence on the slide, because I certainly don't. Okay, how does Bob get Alice's inverse key without Eve intercepting it? That's a big challenge that you point out there. That's called the key distribution problem, and it's indeed a problem, but we will learn about crypto that can be used to achieve this safely. So protecting the key by means that are effective, even on an unsecure channel. Does machine learning break crypto? Does quantum computing break crypto? Is there any machine learning crypto out there? I don't know what machine learning crypto is. Machine learning can be used, or people are currently attempting to use it to break crypto. But so far it turns out that brains are a lot better at breaking crypto than machine learning. So we do use a lot of tools as help us. So breaking crypto is actually one of the things I do in my research, cryptanalysis. But while we often use tools for help, like for example SAT solvers or also different learning algorithms, the main thing that breaks crypto is usually a brain, not a machine.
On the second point, yes. Not in practice at the moment, but in theory. So once powerful enough quantum computers exist, most of the stuff that's used in TLS today for public key crypto will be broken. And that's some of my research, to design schemes that are resistant against these quantum computers. But building a quantum computer itself that is powerful enough to break schemes is already a very big engineering challenge that is currently being attempted by all of the big companies. Yeah.
We'll get a bit to this topic in the fourth crypto lecture to discuss it in a bit more detail. But yes, 2 proposals co-authored by Theo Graz people are currently in a competition where one of all the candidate schemes in the competition will be standardized to achieve this key distribution problem and other problems, even despite quantum computers. This appears to be exactly the stuff that Computerphile talks about. Cool. Are we going to talk about ECDH key agreement protocol? A bit. We are definitely going to talk about the DH key agreement protocol, and I'm going to give you a very short impression about what's the difference between ECDH and DH. However, the detailed math of ECDH is a bit too much for these 4 lectures. If you're interested in that, you can watch a video about it in the cryptography lecture. So in the master course cryptography, there we cover this in more detail, if you're interested in the math behind it. If you just want to know how to use it and the math behind the DH version, we are going to have you covered here. Can you also list some best practices on how to use crypto? I definitely can tell you how not to use crypto. I'm going to do that in lecture number 4. The best short advice that I have is use something standardized. Don't cook up your own protocol, use an existing protocol, like for example TLS. But I will give you lots of piecemeal advice during the next lectures. Do you know blah? Will you also learn about other such projects and stuff like Tails blah blah blah? Well, that's not exactly this course is a bit more foundational than that, I would say. So
yeah, I think
you learn the tools that are used there.
Yeah, but I think especially Tor will be covered in the network part, in the privacy section of the network part from a theoretical point, but we're not going to use any of these more advanced tools. They're not required to solve any of the exercises, but of course you're free to look into that yourself. Yeah, and we'll also give you some pointers on where to go next if you're deeply interested in the topic and what to do after the exercises, if you're more interested in this stuff.
Yeah, so some of what we do in the exercises would be stuff you would do during pen testing, but we don't like have the pen testing instruction sheet. Yeah. Okay, so would it be possible to make the crypto exercises without watching the lectures? I don't recommend it, but do give it a try.
Possible, of course, yeah. And there are enough resources. So if you invest the time to learn it yourself, of course you can do it. So there's nothing holding you back from that.
In particular, if you just want to get all your exercises done next week, you can do that by watching last year's lectures. Yeah. If you don't want to wait, so that's also an option.
And of course, you can invest as much time as you want to learn stuff by yourself as well.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to speed up a bit.
Yeah.
Love to hear what we're doing at the Institute. We'll talk a bit about that during the lecture. We create new algorithms, yes. We break other people's algorithms, yes. We hack CPUs, we do all of that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's been a lot of more interesting topics in the last year, but what? Will there be more topics, especially about cryptography? We have currently very few because we are currently very fully loaded with students from last year.
Yeah.
But if none of the topics there makes you happy, do come to our event and discuss with us. So of course we can open up new topics, but we currently already have so many students, we kept the list relatively short. So this is about bachelor thesis topics, I assume. So in particular, if you have a particular person that where you found old topics interesting, just ask them. So we already had this one here. A bike like that, TU Graz bike, you get it very cheaply if you're employed, even if you're employed as a teaching assistant. If you're not employed, you can still buy it. The person who does that is called Mario. I forgot his last name.
You can find it on the TU Graz page, but I think the demand is very high, so it's actually hard to get one, even if you want one sometimes. Yeah.
Why is cryptocurrency not your favorite topic? Because I do kinda care a bit about our planet and climate and such, and cryptocurrency is usually or very often used as a sort of snake oil to achieve something with a lot of computational effort that could be achieved much more easily with proper crypto. So very often the answer would simply be use a cryptographic signature instead of a proof of work thing that costs, I don't know, bursts out tons of graphics cards. Well, I think they do a lot of damage and they do very little good, unfortunately. There might be some niche applications that are great, but they are so much overshadowed by snake oil applications that, well, I've lost my patience with that topic a bit. Verfassungswissenschaftliche Arbeit in summer term? Unfortunately not. So this is a winter term only thing. But you can start your bachelor thesis at any time when you like. Show you the cat. I think she disappeared. Yeah, sorry, she's not here at the moment. Maybe she appears again, but since we have -8 minutes, I doubt it. How does an exam look like? We're going to look at one in the last crypto lecture. How important is SLP?
The main thing you should take away from SLP is being able to efficiently read and understand C programs. But that's the main thing, I would say. You should be able to look up what standard C library functions do, so be familiar with man pages, be able to read them. But I think most of the stuff that you will need, except for being able to actually read and understand C code, will also be covered in the lecture by Daniel. So what a buffer overflow is, how the stack looks and stuff like that will be repeated there.
Yeah, but it might be a bit fast if you've never heard it before. So you might need to think about it a bit more. Blockchain, no. I will maybe very briefly mention what the main idea is, but I think I already hinted that I don't think it's a good application of cryptography.
There's a very good flowchart on if you should use a blockchain.
And the answer is almost invariably no.
Yes.
Okay, the bachelor thesis topic event is on 14th of October. That's absolutely correct. At 12 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have quantum computers at university? I don't think so, but a lot of research in them is going on.
Yeah, so if you want to play with a quantum computer, I can recommend the IBM Cloud. You can have just Google IBM Quantum Cloud, and there you can actually program very tiny examples on and let them run on a real quantum computer. The problem is that these quantum computers are very, very small, only support like 3 to 5 qubits. You have to be in a queue because many people want to use the very few quantum computers. And yeah, so you can play with that, but you also have to invest some time to actually learn on how to do that, because programming a quantum computer is not like traditional programming at all. You have to apply quantum gates to circuits, you have to understand the math a bit, but the resources on the IBM Quantum Cloud are actually pretty good. So have a look at that if you want.
Is vulnerability equal to threat plus exploit? Well, not exactly, because a vulnerability is a bug, a flaw in the code. So it's a concrete path how to implement a threat, but the exploiting happens afterwards. So once there is an exploit, there is an actually attacker involved, and that's then already an attack.
So a vulnerability is a vulnerability even if you don't exploit it.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't
a
matter
bug
as
exists
much.
even if you don't exploit it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in a bachelor topic, the last time when you can apply, you can start a bachelor topic at any time. It's just if you're doing it in the context of wissenschaftliche Arbeiten and already want to start with your topic there, then we have a deadline sometime at the end of October, I think.
Not all or very little of the bachelor thesis topics are actually similar to the practicals. You can, of course, find some that are similar to the practicals, but yeah.
What I think about a particular coin, well, the same about every other coin. Well, almost. The technology behind blockchain is quite good. Why do you worsen it so much? I can discuss that maybe a bit in more detail in the later course. We will definitely stretch our time budget here. Are the hacklets much different from last year?
Yeah, they will all be somewhat different. So maybe you can reuse some ideas from last year if you did them already. Be careful, if you're not in the same group with the same person as last year, you will have a plagiarism with that other person that is no longer in your group. So it's some kind of a legal problem. If you split the group up into 2 different groups, now you would have a plagiarism with 2 groups. Yeah, so be careful about this.
Okay, here's some advice for the person asking crypto questions. Thanks a lot for that input. Please shut up about cryptocurrency. I tend to agree. Thanks a lot for this. Thanks a lot for joining today. Sorry for the rush at the end, but I really need to give the room over to somebody else. So thanks a lot. If you have any more questions, go to Discord, and I hope to see you all next week. Bye.
Yeah.
Have a great afternoon.